love revival because revival is God. It's the people of God getting closer to God, experiencing more of God, being transformed by the presence of God. This week we want to talk about revival, both for you personally, so that you can have a personal revival in your heart, but also for your family and certainly for your ministry. We'd love it if your church experiences a great revival. But that can't happen until you do. Well, let's talk today about the roadblocks to revival. What hinders God from really being God in your life, in your family, in your church? And there are 7 of them. They're pretty obvious, but if you want to really come close to God, go through each of these and spend time on it, making sure that you're right in each of these areas. The first thing that will obviously block a revival is sin. Isaiah 59 says God separates himself. He is separate from us because of our sin. It's a wall between us and God. You got to deal with sin. You got to acknowledge it, confess it, repent of it, and leave it behind. Second, self-sufficiency. The church of Laodicea, Jesus is on the outside knocking on the door to get back in. Why? Because they didn't think they needed him. Well, friend, you and I know we need God. You may need to confess the sin of self-sufficiency. You haven't been praying. You haven't been worshiping. You haven't been seeking God himself because you don't think you need him. When the reality is, you do. The third roadblock to revival is self-centeredness. When it's all about you, it's not going to be all about God. Revival is all about God. We miss revival when life becomes all about us, our family, our ministry, our thing. You got to lay aside self-centeredness and replace it with God-centeredness. Fourth is bitterness. Bitterness is a wall. It says in Matthew 6, God says, if you're not willing to forgive others, I'm not willing to forgive you. That bitterness becomes a barrier between you and God. You got to lay aside your bitterness. You got to choose to forgive people. Number 5 is unresolved conflict. Matthew 5, God says, don't come bring your worship to me. If you have something wrong with somebody else, go make it right first. And then bring your offering, your worship to me. God values not only our vertical relationship with him, but also our horizontal relationships with other people. He wants those to be right. Often revival begins when we start getting right with other people. Number 6 is a lack of faith. It says in Matthew 13, Jesus didn't do a lot of miracles in his hometown because there just wasn't enough faith. You got to believe. You got to believe who God is and what God can do, and that the God who's done it before is the God who will do it again. Lay aside your lack of faith, your doubt, your fear, your anxiety, and replace it with a belief in a God who's big enough. Start believing God for big things. Even if you don't feel it yet, just start proclaiming it. Just start believing it. Start choosing to believe God for big things. The last is hard-heartedness. God's Spirit speaks. God's Spirit speaks, but when we say no, our hearts become hard and calloused, and it gets to where God can hardly break through. Start saying yes to God. Start confessing the sin of hard-heartedness. Start being sensitive to the Spirit of God. Being very sensitive to the voice of God in your life. And every time God says do something, your answer needs to be yes. Let me ask you, are you experiencing revival in your life? Is your family experiencing revival? Is your church walking in revival? If not, maybe these roadblocks are keeping it from happening. Deal with them today.